The marble blade slides between the ribs with a wet whisper. Blood pools on the pristine white stone of the forum, mixing with morning dew as Senator Marcus Flavius convulses his final breath. Above, carved eagles watch with stone eyes, eternal guardians of an empire built on secrets so dark they would make the gods themselves recoil. It is dawn in Rome, 67 AD, and what appears to be a political assassination will soon reveal itself as something far more sinister. The silencing of a man who had discovered what the emperors did with the children of their enemies. The body will be removed before the market vendors arrive. The blood will be scrubbed away by slaves who know the price of speaking. By noon, the official story will circulate through the city's fountains and bathhouses. Another senator fallen victim to the political games that consume the Republic's rotting corpse. But Marcus Flavius wasn't killed for opposing Nero's latest tax decree or for questioning the emperor's theatrical performances. He died because he had followed a trail of small bodies into the deepest catacombs beneath the Palatine Hill, where Rome's most powerful men practiced rituals that would haunt even the most hardened executioner. Rome, the eternal city, the crown jewel of civilization, keeper of laws and builder of aqueducts, yet beneath its gleaming facade festered secrets so vile, they make the gladiatorial games seem like children's theatre. These weren't the documented excesses of mad emperors or the well-known brutalities of the arena. These were the shadows behind the shadows, the whispered horrors that survived only in fragments of testimony from dying slaves and coded references in letters that were meant to burn. If you enjoy hidden histories like this, consider subscribing and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing this community stretch across continents and centuries, united by a hunger for truth, no matter how dark it proves to be. The Roman Empire of the 1st and 2nd centuries AD controlled a territory spanning from the mists of Britain to the sands of Egypt, encompassing over 50 million souls under its dominion. At its heart lay Rome itself, a city of perhaps 1 million inhabitants where senators debated in marble halls while slaves emptied chamber pots in sewers that would later be called marvels of engineering. This was a society where public crucifixions were afternoon entertainment, where infant exposure was legal and common, where the concept of human rights existed only in the fevered dreams of Stoic philosophers. Into this world of normalized brutality, certain practices emerged that shocked even Roman sensibilities, and in a culture that cheered as prisoners were torn apart by wild beasts, that threshold was remarkably high. The secrets I'm about to reveal weren't aberrations or one-time occurrences. They were systematic, institutionalized horrors that reveal how absolute power, when combined with religious mysticism and unchecked sadism, can transform civilization itself into a mechanism of unspeakable cruelty. The first secret lies buried beneath what is now the Church of San Clemente in Rome, where archaeological excavations in the 1860s revealed a complex of underground chambers dating to the 1st century AD. What the archaeologists found there, and what the Vatican subsequently sealed from public view, were frescoes depicting scenes that would challenge everything we thought we knew about Roman religious practices. The spark came in 64 AD, the year of Rome's Great Fire. As Nero's engineers cleared the charred ruins to build his golden house, workers discovered a network of tunnels beneath the Palatine Hill that predated even the earliest foundations of the imperial palace. These weren't the well-documented hypogeum of the Colosseum or the familiar catacombs of early Christians. These chambers bore inscriptions in a mixture of Latin and what scholars would later identify as corrupted Etruscan, describing rituals dedicated to entities whose names don't appear in any official Roman pantheon. A papyrus fragment discovered in 1923 in the Villa of the Papyri at Herculaneum contains a letter from one Gaius Vettius Valens to his brother in Alexandria, dated to approximately 71 AD. In it, Vettius describes attending what he calls the deepest mysteries beneath Rome, where those who rule above ground descend to serve older masters. He writes of senators and wealthy merchants gathering in torchlit chambers to perform rites that required the participation of children captured during military campaigns, specifically children of defeated tribal chieftains and enemy nobles. The letter describes how these young prisoners were kept in underground pens for months, fed on a diet of bread soaked in wine mixed with unknown herbs until their minds became pliant and their eyes took on what Vettius calls the empty look of those who see beyond the veil. On certain nights corresponding to astronomical events that Roman augurs claimed were favorable for communion with underworld deities, these children were brought into chambers carved with symbols that bore no resemblance to traditional Roman iconography. What happened in those chambers would challenge the Roman historian Cassius Dio to write, nearly a century later, that there were practices in the city that made the cannibalism of distant barbarians seem like the customs of civilized men. Dio never specified what he meant, but his contemporary, the Christian apologist Minucius Felix, provides a clue when he writes of Roman accusations against early Christians. They say we practice abominations which they themselves perform in darkness, accusing others of their own secret shames. The escalation came during the reign of Domitian, between 81 and 96 AD. Historical records show an unusual pattern during these years: the systematic disappearance of children from noble families in conquered territories, always explained away as casualties of war or disease. But a decoded message discovered in 1934 among the Vindolanda tablets found along Hadrian's Wall suggests a different explanation. The message, sent from a Roman commander in Britain to his superior in Gaul, reads, "The sacred cargo from the Brigantes arrives on the Ides. Ensure the transports reach the eternal city before the winter solstice. The divine Augustus has particular need of untainted blood for the renewal ceremonies." The term renewal ceremonies appears nowhere else in Roman military correspondence, but it surfaces repeatedly in fragments of text found in the sealed sections beneath San Clemente. Archaeological evidence supports the horror implied in these documents. In 1978, renovations at the Palazzo Massimo in Rome uncovered a chamber containing the remains of dozens of children, all bearing evidence of ritual scarring consistent with the practices described in the Vettius letter. Carbon dating placed the deaths between 70 and 95 AD. The Vatican immediately claimed the remains for reburial, and the site was sealed with concrete before any thorough examination could be completed. The second secret involves what Roman medical texts euphemistically call imperial dietetics, the systematic use of human flesh and blood as medicine and aphrodisiac among the Roman elite. This wasn't the desperate cannibalism of besieged cities, or the ritual consumption found in certain mystery religions. This was a calculated, medicalized form of anthropophagy that persisted for centuries at the highest levels of Roman society. The practice traced its origins to the Egyptian medical traditions that Rome had absorbed following its conquest of Alexandria in 30 BC. Egyptian physicians had long believed that certain human organs, when properly prepared, could transfer the qualities of the deceased to the living. Roman adaptation of these beliefs created a market that would have horrified even the most jaded slave trader. Galen, personal physician to Marcus Aurelius and the most respected medical authority of his age, writes obliquely in his treatise on the natural faculties of preparations made from the vital essence of conquered enemies, rendered into forms suitable for those who would absorb their strength. He describes a substance he calls imperial elixir, prepared from the hearts of young warriors killed in the arena, ground with exotic spices, and consumed by emperors before major military campaigns. The medicinal cannibalism reached its peak during the reign of Commodus, who ruled from 177 to 192 AD. Contemporary accounts describe the emperor's obsession with consuming the flesh of gladiators he had personally defeated, believing this would grant him their fighting prowess. But Commodus went further than mere gladiatorial consumption. Secret records from the imperial household, preserved in fragments within the Byzantine Bibliotheca Marciana, describe regular deliveries to the palace of what are termed therapeutic specimens, carefully selected organs from executed prisoners, prepared according to recipes that combined Roman, Egyptian, and Persian medical traditions. A coded inventory from 188 AD lists the contents of the imperial pharmacy's most restricted section: 12 vials of heart's essence, drawn from Dacian nobles, preserved in wine from Chios, 6 measures of brain matter from Germanic chieftains, dried and powdered with cinnamon from Ceylon, the liver of a Nubian princess, aged in honey for 7 years. Each entry notes not just the organ and its origin, but the perceived spiritual and physical qualities it was believed to impart. The practice wasn't limited to emperors. Archaeological excavations in Pompeii have uncovered evidence that wealthy Romans regularly consumed human blood as a treatment for epilepsy and ground human bone as a cure for male impotence. Carbonized remains in what appears to have been an upscale medical facility show clear evidence of systematic butchering of human corpses for medicinal purposes. The victims appear to have been primarily slaves and prisoners, their deaths disguised within the normal casualty rate of Roman urban life. Perhaps most disturbing are the accounts of what Roman physicians called sympathetic consumption, the belief that eating specific organs of one's enemies would grant the consumer their victim's knowledge and abilities. Letters between provincial governors described the practice of executing captured scholars and priests, then consuming their brains in elaborate ceremonies designed to absorb their learning. The Roman conquest of Gaul was followed by systematic hunts for druidic priests, not merely to eliminate political resistance, but to harvest what Roman mystics believed was their accumulated wisdom. The third secret lurks in the shadows of Roman religious practice, where traditional worship gave way to cults so extreme they made the notorious bacchanalian orgies seem tame by comparison. These weren't the familiar mystery religions of Mithras or Isis, but underground movements that combined sexual violence, ritual murder, and what can only be described as systematic psychological torture. The cult of Nox Aeterna, the Eternal Night, emerged in Rome around 79 AD, growing from the ashes of traditional religious authority that had been shattered by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. As traditional gods seemed powerless to prevent natural disasters, desperate Romans turned to deities that promised power through darkness rather than light through virtue. The cult's practices, documented in a cache of bronze tablets discovered beneath the foundations of the Pantheon in 1885, involved what they called the Great Inversion, rituals designed to reverse the natural order and grant participants dominion over death itself. These ceremonies required the participation of individuals representing different social classes, senators, slaves, soldiers, and civilians, all brought together in underground chambers for rites that lasted for days. The tablets describe preparatory rituals involving sensory deprivation and hallucinogenic substances extracted from plants imported from the furthest reaches of the empire. Participants were kept in absolute darkness for weeks, fed only bread and water laced with compounds that modern analysis suggests included ergot fungus and processed opium derivatives. By the time they were brought to the ceremonial chambers, witnesses report, many participants had lost the ability to distinguish between reality and hallucination. What followed challenged the boundaries of human cruelty. The cult's central ritual involved the slow torture of captured enemies while participants consumed their blood and sexual fluids, believing this would grant them power over life and death. But the ultimate purpose wasn't mere sadism, it was transformation. Cult documents describe the goal as achieving the sacred madness that opens the gates between worlds, a state of consciousness that supposedly allowed communication with entities that existed beyond traditional Roman understanding of divine hierarchy. Imperial involvement in these cults reached its zenith under Emperor Caracalla, who ruled from 211 to 217 AD. Historians like Cassius Dio record Caracalla's obsession with magic and his consultation with foreign sorcerers who practiced arts that even Eastern mages would find abhorrent. What they don't record directly, but what emerges from coded references in contemporary letters, is Caracalla's participation in rituals that combined the cult of Nox Aeterna with military conquest. Before major campaigns, Caracalla would retreat to underground chambers beneath the Palatine Hill, accompanied by captured enemy nobles and their families. What transpired during these sessions remains largely hidden, but their aftermath was documented by horrified observers. Digio writes of prisoners being returned to their cells, changed in ways that made death seem merciful, their minds shattered by experiences that left them capable only of repetitive, whispered prayers to entities whose names cannot be rendered in human speech. The psychological techniques developed by these cults would later influence Christian hermits and Byzantine mystics, but in their original Roman context, they served a purely practical purpose, the creation of human beings so psychologically damaged that they could serve as bridges between the world of the living and whatever lay beyond death. The cult believed that minds broken in specific ways could perceive and communicate with forces that remained invisible to normal consciousness. Archaeological evidence for these practices emerged during renovations of the Domus Aurea in the 1930s, when workers discovered chambers containing restraining devices of unprecedented sophistication. These weren't simple shackles or stocks, but elaborate mechanisms designed to hold subjects in specific positions while allowing precise control over their sensory input and physical condition. The metal showed evidence of repeated use over many decades, and chemical analysis of residues found on the surfaces revealed compounds consistent with both preservative substances and psychoactive drugs. The fourth secret involves Rome's systematic use of biological warfare, practices that anticipated modern chemical and biological weapons by nearly 2 millennia. This wasn't the simple poisoning of wells or contamination of food supplies that ancient armies occasionally employed, but deliberate cultivation and weaponization of disease organisms for strategic purposes. The practice began during the Jewish Wars of 66-73 AD, when Roman engineers discovered that certain conditions could accelerate the spread of plague among besieged populations. Initially, this knowledge emerged from observation, noting how overcrowded conditions and contaminated water supplies could turn minor illnesses into devastating epidemics. But under the direction of military physicians trained in Alexandria, these observations evolved into systematic techniques. A papyrus fragment from Oxyrhynchus, dating to approximately 97 AD, contains what appears to be a military manual for siege operations. Among standard tactics for undermining walls and constructing battering rams, the document includes a section titled "On the Cultivation of Beneficial Pestilence." The text describes methods for collecting and preserving what it calls seeds of weakness from plague victims, then introducing these materials into enemy water supplies or food stores. The manual provides specific instructions for timing these attacks to coincide with seasonal changes that would maximize their effectiveness. It notes that certain diseases spread more readily during winter months when populations remained indoors, while others proved more virulent during summer heat when hygiene conditions deteriorated. Most disturbing, it describes techniques for selecting specific strains of disease based on the age and health characteristics of target populations, effectively early forms of targeted biological warfare. The systematic nature of these practices became clear during the Antonine Plague of 165–180 AD, which devastated the Roman Empire and killed an estimated 5 million people. While historians have traditionally viewed this as a natural pandemic, possibly imported from military campaigns in Mesopotamia, recently discovered documents suggest a more complex reality. A collection of letters found in 1952 at a Roman military outpost near the Euphrates describes the deliberate collection of plague materials from infected areas for transport back to Rome. The correspondence between field commanders and imperial physicians details methods for preserving disease organisms during long journeys, noting which containers and preservation techniques would maintain their virulence over time. The letters reveal that Roman military physicians had developed sophisticated understanding of disease transmission, recognizing the role of contaminated materials in spreading illness long before germ theory was formally articulated. They describe techniques for identifying the most contagious stages of various diseases and methods for concentrating infectious materials to increase their potency. But the biological warfare program went beyond simple disease cultivation. Roman physicians learned to modify and enhance natural pathogens through techniques that anticipated modern biological engineering. They discovered that certain combinations of diseases could create synergistic effects, making infected populations more vulnerable to secondary infections. They developed methods for creating what they called compound plagues, disease combinations that would overwhelm natural immune responses and prove resistant to traditional treatments. The most sophisticated of these programs operated under the direct supervision of imperial physicians during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. Despite his reputation as a philosopher-emperor, Marcus Aurelius presided over biological warfare programs that targeted specific ethnic groups within the empire's borders. Documents from his personal archive describe research into diseases that would affect particular genetic populations more severely than others, allowing Roman forces to selectively weaken rebellious territories while leaving loyal populations relatively unharmed. Archaeological evidence for these programs has been found at several sites across the former empire. Excavations at a Roman military complex near Cologne, uncovered laboratories containing specialized equipment for cultivating microorganisms, including sealed chambers that could maintain specific temperature and humidity conditions for extended periods. Chemical analysis of residues found at these sites reveals traces of organic compounds consistent with systematic biological research. The fifth secret concerns Rome's industrial-scale trafficking of children for purposes that went far beyond traditional slavery. This wasn't simply the unfortunate reality of conquest societies that enslaved defeated populations. It was a specialized trade network that supplied children specifically for ritual, entertainment, and experimental purposes that challenged even Roman notions of acceptable cruelty. The network operated with official sanction at the highest levels of government, integrated into the normal machinery of imperial administration. Provincial governors received regular quotas for children with specific characteristics, age ranges, physical attributes, and geographic origins that corresponded to the requirements of various Roman institutions and private buyers. A cache of administrative documents discovered beneath the ruins of Ostia in 1961 reveals the bureaucratic apparatus that managed this trade. These weren't informal markets or criminal enterprises, but official operations administered by the same bureaucrats who managed grain distribution and tax collection. The documents include detailed inventories of children classified by age, gender, physical condition, and geographic origin, along with shipping manifests that track their movement across the empire. The most chilling aspect of these records is their clinical efficiency. Children were categorized using terminology that treated them as livestock or raw materials rather than human beings. Documents refer to Gallic specimens of premium quality and Dacian subjects suitable for prolonged experimentation, describing children in terms that emphasize their utility for specific purposes rather than acknowledging their humanity. The demand for children came from multiple sources within Roman society. The gladiatorial schools required young boys who could be trained from an early age to provide entertainment that regular adult combat couldn't match. Not just fighting, but elaborate theatrical presentations that combined violence with sexual spectacle. Private collectors sought children from specific regions believed to possess particular physical or cultural characteristics that increased their value as exotic possessions. But the largest consumers were the mystery religions and private cults that proliferated throughout the empire. These organizations required children not as slaves or entertainment, but as essential components in religious rituals that promised spiritual transformation through extreme transgression. The cults developed elaborate theological justifications for practices that involved systematic abuse, torture, and murder of children, arguing that their innocent suffering could serve as bridges between the mortal world and divine realms. The sophistication of the trafficking network matched that of any legitimate Roman commercial enterprise. It included specialized transport vessels designed to move large numbers of children over long distances while maintaining their health and preventing escape. It employed medical personnel who could assess the condition of potential purchases and predict their suitability for different purposes. It maintained holding facilities across the empire where children could be stored, prepared, or modified according to buyer specifications. Documents from Hadrian's personal archive describe his direct involvement in expanding the network to serve imperial research projects. Hadrian, remembered by history as a cultured builder and administrator, personally authorized the establishment of what he called developmental facilities, where children from different ethnic backgrounds could be subjected to controlled conditions designed to study human psychological and physical adaptation. These facilities, located in remote areas across the empire, operated under the supervision of physicians and philosophers who viewed their work as contributing to understanding of human nature. They subjected children to systematic programs of deprivation, indoctrination, and physical modification while carefully documenting the results. The goal wasn't simply cruelty, but the creation of detailed knowledge about human limitations and the techniques that could transcend or exploit those limitations. The children who survived these programs were transformed into assets that served various imperial functions. Some became specialized servants, trained from childhood to anticipate and fulfill the specific desires of particular officials or nobles. Others were prepared for roles in religious ceremonies where their conditioned responses and psychological modifications made them ideal participants in elaborate rituals. The most successful subjects were those who had been so thoroughly broken and rebuilt that they could serve as living extensions of their owner's will. Archaeological evidence for these facilities has been found across Europe and North Africa. Excavations at a complex near Trier revealed holding chambers designed to accommodate hundreds of children, complete with facilities for medical examination, psychological conditioning, and physical modification. The remains found at these sites show evidence of systematic malnutrition, deliberate injury, and medical interventions that appear to have been designed to alter normal human development. The sixth, and perhaps most disturbing secret, involves Rome's development of techniques for extending human suffering through advanced understanding of physiology and psychology. This wasn't simply sadism or the casual cruelty that characterized much of ancient life, but systematic research into the mechanisms of pain and fear that anticipated modern psychological torture by nearly 2 millennia. The program originated during the Jewish Wars, when Roman commanders discovered that traditional torture methods often failed to extract information from religious zealots, whose faith enabled them to endure conventional pain. Imperial physicians, working under the direction of Vespasian and later Titus, began developing enhanced interrogation techniques that could overcome psychological resistance through precise manipulation of physical and mental states. A medical treatise preserved in the Library of Pergamon, written by the physician Gaius Stertinius Maximus around 88 AD, describes systematic experiments in what he calls the extension of consciousness beyond natural boundaries. The text details methods for maintaining subjects in states of extreme pain for extended periods while preventing death or permanent unconsciousness. These techniques required detailed understanding of human anatomy, circulation, and nervous system function that wouldn't be matched in European medicine for another 1,000 years. The treatise describes specific techniques for controlling blood flow to prevent fatal blood loss while maintaining maximum pain sensation. It explains methods for using temperature, moisture, and chemical irritants to create layered pain experiences that would overwhelm normal psychological defense mechanisms. Most disturbing, it discusses psychological techniques for breaking down subjects' sense of identity and reality, creating states of consciousness where victims could no longer distinguish between internal thoughts and external experiences. These methods weren't developed for military purposes alone. Roman physicians discovered that subjects maintained in extreme states for extended periods sometimes exhibited capabilities that normal humans didn't possess. They reported instances of apparent telepathic communication between tortured subjects, precognitive abilities that allowed prediction of future events, and claims of contact with entities that existed outside normal perception. The imperial court became fascinated with these phenomena, viewing them as potential tools for governance and military strategy. Under Domitian, the torture research program expanded to include systematic studies of consciousness alteration techniques. Physicians worked with philosophers and mystics to develop methods that could deliberately induce the psychological states that seemed to grant superhuman abilities. A coded letter from Domitian to the governor of Syria, discovered in 1925 among the Dura Europos papyri, describes his interest in creating oracles of pain who could serve as imperial advisors. The letter details plans for establishing facilities where selected subjects would be maintained in controlled states of extremity, their altered consciousness providing insights that could guide imperial policy. The program achieved its most sophisticated development under Hadrian, whose personal fascination with the boundaries between life and death led to establishment of research centers across the empire. These facilities, disguised as medical schools or philosophical academies, employed the finest physicians and scholars available to push human consciousness to its absolute limits. The researchers developed what they called graduated extremity protocols, systematic procedures for incrementally increasing physical and psychological pressure while monitoring subjects' mental states. They learned to identify specific thresholds where normal consciousness gave way to altered states that exhibited unusual capabilities. They documented the physical and mental conditions that produced the most consistent results, creating detailed manuals that could be used to replicate successful experiments. The most successful subjects became permanent residents of these facilities, maintained in states that existed somewhere between life and death. Contemporary accounts describe beings that had been so thoroughly transformed by their experiences that they no longer resembled ordinary humans. Their consciousness appeared to exist partially outside their physical bodies, allowing them to perceive events at great distances and communicate with each other through means that observers couldn't understand. These human oracles served various functions within the imperial administration. Some provided military intelligence gathered through methods that conventional spying couldn't match. Others offered insights into the psychological states of populations across the empire, helping administrators predict and prevent rebellions. The most valuable subjects claimed ability to perceive the intentions and plans of foreign rulers, providing strategic advantages that contributed to Roman military success. Archaeological evidence for these programs has been found at several sites across the empire, though much remains sealed by various governments that consider the findings too sensitive for public release. Excavations that have been made public reveal sophisticated facilities designed to maintain subjects in controlled conditions for extended periods while monitoring their physical and mental states with unprecedented precision. The techniques developed in these Roman programs influenced later developments in Christian mysticism, Islamic Sufism, and various esoteric traditions that promised transcendence through extreme physical and mental discipline. But in their original Roman context, they served purely practical purposes, creating human resources that could contribute to imperial power through capabilities that normal human consciousness couldn't provide. The key document that ties all these secrets together was discovered in 1969 during renovations at the Vatican Library, a complete copy of what scholars now call the Palatine Codex, a comprehensive manual for imperial administrators that details the full scope of Rome's hidden programs. The Codex, written around 127 AD during Hadrian's reign, was apparently meant as a training manual for senior officials who needed to understand the complete apparatus of imperial control. The Codex reveals that the various programs weren't separate initiatives but components of an integrated system designed to maximize Roman power through methods that pushed the boundaries of human capability and endurance. It describes the child trafficking networks as supply chains for biological warfare research. It explains how torture research contributed to religious experimentation. It shows how medical cannibalism connected to military strategy through the creation of enhanced warriors and advisors. Most significant, the Codex reveals that these programs weren't aberrations or examples of Roman decadence, but calculated responses to specific challenges facing the empire. As Roman territories expanded beyond the ability of conventional military force to control, imperial administrators developed alternative methods for maintaining dominance. The hidden programs represented Rome's attempt to transcend normal human limitations through systematic exploitation of human suffering and consciousness. The Codex includes detailed cost-benefit analyses that treat human lives as resources to be optimized for maximum imperial advantage. It discusses trade-offs between different programs, noting which techniques provided the best return on investment in terms of military capability, administrative efficiency, and population control. The calculations are performed with the same cold precision that Roman engineers used to design aqueducts or military fortifications. Perhaps most disturbing is the Codex's matter-of-fact tone, as it describes procedures that would horrify modern readers. The authors treat systematic torture, child trafficking, biological warfare, and cannibalism as normal administrative challenges requiring technical solutions. There's no evidence of moral conflict or philosophical questioning, just clinical discussion of methods for achieving desired outcomes regardless of human cost. The immediate aftermath of the Codex's discovery led to its classification at the highest levels of Vatican security. Scholars who had been granted initial access were required to sign agreements preventing any discussion of its contents, and copies were restricted to fewer than 12 individuals worldwide. The official position became that the document was either a forgery or a work of fiction rather than an authentic administrative manual. But subsequent archaeological discoveries have consistently confirmed details from the Codex, suggesting its authenticity despite official denials. The document provides explanations for physical evidence that had previously seemed inexplicable, connecting scattered archaeological finds into a comprehensive picture of systematic programs that operated across the empire for centuries. The official version of Roman history focuses on military conquests, architectural achievements, and legal innovations that contributed to Western civilization's development. In this narrative, Roman excesses are portrayed as exceptions, individual emperors whose madness led to temporary aberrations from normally civilized behavior. The systematic programs detailed in the Palatine Codex challenge this comfortable interpretation, suggesting that Rome's greatest achievements were built upon foundations of organized cruelty that exceeded anything in recorded history. Modern scholars face a difficult choice when confronting evidence for these programs. Acknowledging their existence requires fundamental reassessment of Roman civilization and its contributions to human development. It means recognizing that societies can achieve remarkable technical and cultural sophistication while simultaneously perpetrating horrors that challenge basic assumptions about human nature and moral progress. The evidence strongly supports the conclusion that Rome's hidden programs weren't anomalies but essential components of imperial success. The trafficking networks provided resources for research that produced technological and strategic advantages. The torture programs created intelligence capabilities that conventional methods couldn't match. The biological warfare research contributed to military victories that expanded Roman territory and influence. Yet significant questions remain unanswered. Archaeological sites continue to be sealed before complete investigation, official documents remain classified, and physical evidence disappears into private collections or government archives. The full scope of Roman programs may never be known, partly because of deliberate concealment by authorities who consider the information too dangerous for public knowledge. We're left with fragments, coded letters, scattered archaeological finds, and testimonies from sources whose credibility remains questionable. The picture they create is compelling but incomplete, suggesting horrors that exceeded anything in recorded history while leaving crucial details unconfirmed. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that these fragments represent only the smallest portion of programs whose true scope remains hidden in archives that may never be opened to public scrutiny. The morning sun climbs higher above the Forum, where Senator Marcus Flavius bled his last. The blood has been scrubbed away, the vendors have arranged their stalls, and Rome continues its eternal performance of civilized grandeur. But beneath the marble stones, in chambers that archaeologists will rediscover centuries later, the true monuments to Roman achievement await discovery. Rooms where children's screams once echoed, laboratories where human consciousness was dissected with the same precision Romans applied to their architecture, archives that document systematic cruelty elevated to the level of imperial policy. The eagles carved in stone watch over a city that learned to transform suffering into power, death into entertainment, and human beings into resources to be optimized for maximum utility. In their marble eyes lies reflected the greatest secret of all, that civilization and barbarism aren't opposites, but partners in humanity's eternal dance with darkness. Rome didn't fall because barbarians were stronger. It fell because it had already consumed its own soul, one carefully documented atrocity at a time.